Hello. It's the first Sunday of the month. You know what that means. It is time to review all of the books that I read in June. Woo! This month I read 12 books, but the majority of them were either graphic novels or nonfiction. It's been a strange 4 weeks. I had my final exams for my Dutch class, and a very unexpected crash followed shortly thereafter. For almost a year, I've been balancing both my creative work with school, which are all things I like, but still a lot. So once school was off the table, my body flung itself out of fight mode and straight into the no thoughts, just couch mode. I've also been doing a lot of doctor's visits, and we'll talk about that later because a doctor did recommend a book to me this month that I read. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. As always, don't compare yourself to anyone, period, but especially when it comes to reading. Secondly, I'm just a small insignificant person on the internet.com sharing my small insignificant feelings about books. Maybe I hated a book that you loved, maybe I loved a book that you hated. That's fine. It doesn't mean anything other than we had very different experiences to ink on paper. It's not that deep. And thirdly, of course, check all content warnings before diving into any book. Take care of your sensitivities. There's no shame in that. And let's get started. The first book that I read in the month of June was Maybe You Should Talk to Somebody by Lori Gottlieb. This is Gottlieb's memoir. She is a therapist in California. So not only do we get a peek into her therapy office with her own patients, but we follow her into her own personal therapist's office and get some advice from him as well. Now, I have been considering diving back into therapy myself. Maybe I hope that it would inspire me to try again. And it technically did do that because I loved Lori's therapist, Wendell. Most of the things that I underlined were his nuggets of wisdom, and I also loved Lori's patient, Julie. I honestly would love to read an entire book about Julie's life from Julie's perspective because she was so spectacular. That being said, it did feel strange to read Lori's memoir but only care about Wendell and Julie. I don't want to be too critical because this is not my life and I don't feel like it's my place to tell somebody else how to tell their story. But considering the title of this book and the image on the cover of the book, I wish we had strictly stayed in the therapy spaces. We had a lot of flashbacks to Lori's life working on TV sets and things like that, and I just don't personally see how that needed to be included in the story. Every time we were in those realms of her life, I wanted to go back, learn more about Julie, hear more from Wendell, and that just didn't feel right seeing as I was reading Lori's memoir. It did feel a little all over the place. It did feel a little bit disjointed. So this isn't one that I would recommend to the high heavens. I don't think this is something that everybody has to read. I don't think that it was out of this world by any means, but it was still quite nice, and I have a lot of underlines in there, and it did make me tear up. There was a moment with Julie that made me tear up, and it's really hard for books to do that for me. So thank you for your story, Lori. Next, In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. This is about a group of friends who are at their college reunion 10 years after a friend in their group got murdered. It's very much reminiscent of that game Until Dawn in that respect, and also much like the game Until Dawn, there is a whole lot of he said, she said, who's to blame kind of energy within these pages. A lot of people didn't like this one, and I totally get it. It's not a slow burn, it's more so just like there's so much to drudge through and understand. A lot of characters are thrown at you, and there's a lot of relationships to understand before being able to reach that rewarding ending, at least in my opinion. I was so shocked that this book is not YA. It very much had the flavor of a young adult fiction. I don't exactly know why it's categorized as adult. Maybe it's a silly reason, much like movies where if you say f 3 times it's automatically rated R or something, but it just did not feel like an adult book. So if YA thrillers aren't your thing, also totally get why this would be for you. But somehow I was hooked onto these pages through and through. The chapters were nice and short, and every chapter left you on like the teeniest little cliffhanger, so I kept wanting to read more and more and more. Without any effort whatsoever, I devoured the entire thing without getting up once. Like I said, it does take a little bit to care about the characters and to be invested in the drama, but then once you're hooked, oh, you're getting reeled in. You know, the nanosecond that planted seed sprouted within the blink of an eye, it was a full-blown plant, completely engulfing me and caring about what happened next. I've been saying this for a while, but I really think that my taste in thriller is not that great or profound. I don't look for too much when it comes to a thriller. All I care about is if I want to keep turning the pages, and this one did that. I just love cheap thrills. I love being buckled in for the ride and just thrown all over the place on the roller coaster of this dumpster fire. Not that your book is a dumpster fire, Ashley, do not get me wrong, but the characters, what a dumpster fire that they created, and I care about everything that unfolded in that dumpster, so thank you. Next. I read Feelings, A Story in Seasons by Manjit Thap. This is a short graphic novel about the changing of seasons and how our moods change along with them, which then shows how habits change and which ritualistic things that we could partake in to adjust to these changes. It's not a self-help book, it's not a how-to, it's just an illustration of the seasons. I love this one so much, not just because I absolutely love the art style within this, but also this was just such a quiet book, you know what I mean? It slowed me down, it explored such simple yet literally life-changing ideas. It was was perfectly poetic. It was beautifully mundane. There's no story here, and I've seen a couple people on Goodreads say that it was just okay for them because there weren't enough stakes, there wasn't enough to it for them. But to me, that's what made this book so much more special. I'm someone who's very sensitive. Period. That's the end of that sentence. But I'm someone who's very sensitive to the seasons changing, and so I struggle with transitions and change in general, even if they're positive changes. So I did feel a lot of comfort in seeing such a universally understood and human experience laid out in such a gorgeous way. To me, this graphic novel is comfort incarnate. I can honestly see myself turning back to this book as each season changes, as a kind of reminder or preparation for what's to come. I loved this one. Next, we read Almond by Won-Pyeong-san for the Pocket Pages book club book for June. So this is a story about a boy named Yoonjae who has alexithymia, which just means that he can't feel emotions or pinpoint exactly what he's feeling at any given moment, which makes for a very interesting reading experience as we follow him throughout his life with this perspective as quite terrible things happen to him. I'm so glad that we read this one together because the discussion was so strong and so many people raised so many excellent points. So thank you so much for reading this with me. Overall, I loved the short chapters and especially the voice of our protagonist and also just the voice of our author. I think there was really strong storytelling abilities. I thought it was a very readable story, but almost unanimously the majority of us in the chat decided that the first 2/3 of the book were spot on, they were strong, and then the ending was a little bit disappointing for most of us. I don't want to spoil anything, of course, but the ending was just a little bit too Hollywood in my opinion, but I don't think that makes this not worth the read by any means. This book held a very strong friendship within it, and it also had a lot to say about acceptance without spoon feeding it to the readers, which I loved. So I quite liked this one, and I really appreciated the discussion that we had on Discord. If you would like to join the Pocket Pages book club, there is a link in the description box below. It's $1 a month. You can come and go whenever you like. We read a book within the first 3 weeks of the month and discuss in a temporary Discord server in the last week of the month. So you don't have to be available for any live streams or anything like that. There's no way to miss out. In July, we are reading Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. There's a printable bookmark and everything. Join us. It'll be great. Woo! Next, I read 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. Now, as some of you may know, I'm trying to thaw my romance-hating heart and find romance novels that slap. I found my first 5-star romance earlier this year. It was Dating Dr. Dill. Loved it so much. And what makes a complete romance story to me is if the characters are there, they're strong, they have their own lives, they have their own voices, they have their own goals, they have jobs, friends, family, question mark. To me, it needs to all be there so that I can care about the characters and thus care about their romance and thus care about the spice. And this book did that. 7 Days in June takes place literally across 7 days in June as an old flame between two authors gets rekindled. I thought the characters in this book were so strong, not just in a literal resilience sense, you know. They are blasting through any challenge that life may throw at them, but also they were strongly written. Our protagonist suffers from chronic migraines, which, hello, thank you so much for representing that so accurately, Tia. Disability properly placed and represented. Love it. This was just such a beautiful story that shows us that people are capable of redemption and we're worthy of love and growth as long as we are putting in the work to love and grow ourselves. I loved this one so much, so much, and I think it deserves all the hype that it has and then some, and then heaps more on top of that. I think Audrey is my favorite character. I loved everyone. I loved this whole book so much. Pick it up if you've been thinking of doing so now. Next, I then read Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin. This is a short psychological kind of horror fiction, and not only is this book quite thin, so it's a very fast read, but there aren't a lot of words on each page, so it is an even quicker read than you anticipate. I feel like this book should get the award for most aptly named book because it truly did feel like a fever dream reading it, and in the best way. And therefore, I think my advice for you going into it would be to treat it like a dream. You know, when you're dreaming, sure, you're searching for answers, but you're just kind of along for the ride. Allow yourself to be confused at parts that don't make sense and move on from them. Don't demand answers. Pick up little crumbs of what may be clear to you, pocket them, hold them for later. And also, most importantly, just have no expectations. Just do it. Just follow what's happening as best as you can, come out the other side, and then do a little bit of research because the meaning behind this book is very important. Confusion makes sense because the characters in this book are confused themselves. Our protagonist is literally being poisoned, seeing as this book is about how dangerous it is to live in farming communities in Argentina because of the pesticides that are polluting the water in neighboring communities, which led to pregnancy complications, serious illness, and sometimes even death. So you really are in the exact same position as the character in this book, trying to piece together what is happening as if your brain were also being poisoned by these chemicals. Sprinkling horror elements into a dreamlike story to illustrate the dangers and consequences of agricultural runoff. Schweblin, you genius. I wouldn't recommend this to everybody because I understand that the writing style isn't for everybody, and I understand that not everybody is comfortable with being confused, but I personally immediately ordered another book by Schweblin because I was just so impressed by it. So I liked it. Next! Snapdragon by Kat Leigh. This is a children's middle grade magical realism story, graphic novel rather, about a young girl who befriends her town's witch and discovers magic within herself. This is just another one of those stories where the characters are so clear and concise. The bonds that they all have with one another made me feel like I was a part of the community, even though I don't live here. I'm all the way over here in the real world, unfortunately. I went into this one assuming that it would just be a cute magical story, but simple and fun, and it went so much deeper than I had anticipated originally. There were so many loose ends that came together in the end that I didn't even realize were untied. It's fun, it's adventurous, there's trans representation, there's raccoon bones, there's fox ghosts. I highly recommend this one. Will there be a second one? Anything else that this person makes? Sign me up. Next, I read Internal Family Systems Therapy 2nd edition by Richard Schwartz and Martha Schweezy. This is a textbook. Why I felt I needed to read this instead of, I don't know, Googling it, still a mystery. IFS is the therapeutic approach that believes that any big negative emotion within you comes from a version of yourself that essentially is just trying to protect you. A very commonly understood version of ourselves is our inner child, which Schwartz never uses that exact vocabulary, but an inner child would fall into one of his categories. So most of us are familiar with healing our inner child, working with our inner child. So it basically is that idea, but more fleshed out. So basically he believes in sitting down in therapy with an extra chair and imagining these versions of yourself in said chair, talking with that person, understanding that person more, grasping the intentions, so then you can be more synchronized with your true self. I think this was very interesting, definitely something I can get behind. When I said that I was reading this book, a couple of you reached out and said that you also do IFS, which is so interesting, and thank you for sharing that with me. This book was written a little bit strangely, but at the end of the day, it did what it came here to do. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor. Why do I have this book? Why did I read this book? Alas, I know more about IFST now, so what more can I ask for? Okay. Then I tried to read Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. Now, aside from that one week where I read 7 books in 7 days, there's a whole vlog on it, I have been in quite a strange brand of reading slump. Typically when I read books, there's a movie that plays in my head, especially if it's written well or written in a way that will play the movie. But the film reel in my noggin has been on the fritz. It's under construction. I keep calling the company that says that they'll come fix it. They keep rescheduling. It's a mess. So a lot of what I read last month, like I said, graphic novels, because the movie is there on the pages. I don't need to create it, and also nonfiction because it's just dry learning, which was what I could digest, and I accept it. Just wanted to preface with that because I think that is 50% of the reason that I DNF'd this book. This is about 2 siblings that get together after their mother passes to listen to the tape that she left for them. Her will was on the tape. And while we sit down with the siblings to listen to said tape, we learn about the mother's past in her hometown on her island. And so I totally understand why this book is as popular as it is, because there are some seriously beautiful slices of life and culture within these pages which cannot be denied. They are effortlessly woven into the story, which I think is very important. However, the thing that made me unable to continue was that this whole story was just being told to me. I wasn't being shown anything. A lot of characters were being thrown my way, and all of their intentions and their feelings were just told to me. I was never left to discover things on my own or come to my own conclusions, and it made it really difficult to follow because it kind of more so felt like a grocery list of each character that I wasn't able to memorize, which just left me pretty confused. That doesn't mean that the type of storytelling is bad. It obviously works for a lot of people, and that's great, but I think that paired with my inability to play my movie in my brain and this type of writing, not able to push play on said movie, just wasn't the best pairing. I read about half of it, had to put it down. I just don't think that this writing style and I connect, which is fine. It's okay. If you like this, that's wonderful, and I totally see why. Next, I picked up, you guessed it, another nonfiction. Overthinking About You, Navigating Romantic Relationships When You Have Anxiety, OCD, and or Depression by Alison Raskin. Alison Raskin is a content creator that I've been following for years online who has had OCD since she was 4 years old. She's a fellow neurodivergent who went back to school in her early 30s. Remember, your timeline. And I was just so excited and endlessly proud of her for coming out with her first book. Within it, she interviews a lot of therapists, doctors, psychiatrists to get their take on navigating relationships when you're mentally ill. Now, for me personally, I really did hope that this would have more insight on how to be a good partner while you're in a relationship, but it was more so advice on how to find a relationship, which is fine, just not what I was particularly looking for or need at this present time. But if you do have any of these diagnoses and you are struggling to connect with someone, you are struggling to understand how to navigate those waters, this could be a very helpful book for you. My favorite chapter was the one on medication, and I loved how she discussed how our bodies can change while we're on medication and all the complicated feelings that may come alongside that. And I mean this next comment in the most objective, non-judgmental way possible, but it does very much read like a BuzzFeed article, which I think has its own merit and could help in its own way. Hear me out. I think a lot of people struggle with nonfiction, which I personally think could be a strength for this book because because if you don't want to read a cut and dry facts and stats book about OCD, depression, and dating, and instead you want to read a book that sounds like your friend is emailing you, this is perfect for that. It might not be my style when it comes to nonfiction, but I think that this is going to really help with the accessibility of this book. Overall, I thought this book was pretty okay. I underlined some stuff. I'm proud of Allison. I'm looking forward to seeing everything that she makes in the future, and I'm convinced that she'll find her happy ending because she is putting in the damn work. Next, I read Connecting with the Autism Spectrum, How to Talk, How to Listen, and Why You Shouldn't Call It High Functioning by Casey Remroff-Vormer. This book is exactly what it says that it is, the complete guide to connecting with adults on the autism spectrum. This is a book that a doctor of mine recommended to me after she informed me that I'm on the spectrum myself. Hi, my name is Allie. I'm 27 years old and I just found out that I'm autistic. I was only just given this diagnosis after years of being tossed between different psychiatric theories, medications, treatments. It was a whole mess. And none of those diagnoses properly fit. None of the treatments helped, and it all makes sense why now. So after years of not knowing, months of being on waiting lists, and what felt like endless interviews and tests and puzzles that were making me cry, I was informed that all this time I was on the spectrum. Getting a diagnosis is a doorway and a privilege that I do not take lightly. However, it's been a surprisingly heavy thing to face, which makes sense. At the end of the day, I have almost 30 years of experiences of not being understood and also not understanding myself, and I just have all of these interactions and moments that I have to process through this new lens of self-understanding, which has proven to be a lot. So I was very happy that my doctor recommended a book for me because that is how I cope with everything, is reading. I've been wondering if I was on the spectrum for about 5 years now, and so I've read quite a few books to try and understand myself better, understand my family better, just understand everything better. And just let me say, this one is top tier. It's short, it's sweet, it's to the point. There's no fluffy, fancy language. Each section has a boldened header or topic, and it breaks down how you can help each sector of an autistic person's life. So for example, the chapter on work could discuss how this is where an autistic person will thrive in the workplace, this is where an autistic person will most likely need some accommodations in the workplace, and here's what you can do as an employer to accommodate your autistic employee, here's what you can do as an autistic employee to accommodate for yourself. And it does that across everything: relationship, self-care, all that jazz. So if you have a friend, family member, co-worker, partner, or just know anybody that's on the spectrum, including yourself, I couldn't recommend this book more because it's just such a great introductory piece of material that can begin your path to understanding yourself or somebody else. So if you want to better understand what this diagnosis means and the many ways that it could differently manifest in each individual, read this book. Read this book. And the last book that I read in the month of June, I read just last night before bed, and we have to take it off of my favorite shelf because it is a new favorite of mine, and it is The Shadows by Zabu and Hippolyte. I hope I'm saying your names correctly. I'm so sorry if I'm not. Zabas. Okay. Hippolyte. Okay, Zabas and Hippolyte wrote The Shadows and drew The Shadows, and oh my god, I found this book in an indie graphic novel shop. The art is what drew me in, but the concept is what made me buy it immediately. I've heard nothing about this book before. I've never seen anyone talk about it, and that's not in a hipster, oh look what I found kind of way, more so just like, let's start talking about this please. The back says, to apply for asylum, refugee 214 must tell his story. With him in the room are a man from his new country and the shadows of 4 loved ones who did not survive the journey. 214 reveals how he and his younger sister fled their homes and set off toward the border, how they met and suffered with friends and lost them, and how the plight of the refugee is an experience that erases differences between individuals, even as it threatens to erase the individuals themselves. In just under 200 pages, this book employs some of the most incredible illustrations my eyeballs have ever seen, as well as exploring the many hurdles that one may encounter while attempting to create a new life for themselves. The moral ambiguity that is oftentimes required in order to survive, the power of truth, the importance of your own personal narrative, resilience, magic, strong character connection, all with a sprinkle of capitalism critique. This is everything I look for in a book. It was so powerful and heartbreaking and simple, but so deep, and not simple at all, but so simply told, but hits you right in the throat and gut and heart and everywhere sensitive. I hope all of you read it. Please go read it. Please go get it. It's so creatively done and powerfully composed. The ending left my whole body in chills, and I was just speechless. I couldn't say anything. I just had to sit there and process. And then I turned to Lawrence and all I could say was, you have to read this. And so now I will turn to you and say, you have to read this. You have to read this. Please read this. Oh, what the fuck? And that is that. Those are the 12 books that I read in the month of June. It was a pretty funky reading month, but still a successful reading month nonetheless. I learned a lot. I fell in love. I found a new favorite. What more can you ask for? In July, I am hoping to read lots more. There are 2 summer readathons that are taking place in July that I will be participating in. There's a whole video where I break them both down, share my extremely adventurous TBRs and more. I'll link it up there and down there, all that jazz. And once again, the biggest of thank yous to everyone that's on the Patreon right now. You are the reason that I'm able to upload as frequently as I do. If you'd like to join us for July in reading Betty, if you're interested in printing out a matching bookmark for each and every book that we read each and every month, or in the month of July, it is Summer Strawberry Snail Time. Definitely one of the designs I'm most excited for. Whew, that's that. I hope you're happy. And as always, thank you for clicking, thank you for caring, and thank you for being nice. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!